Welcome to After the Buzzer. This is the portion of our show where we dive into a topic that we didn't get a chance to talk too much about that we think deserves a little bit more airtime. On this episode, we're going to be talking about the enigma that is Allen Iverson and how his ability to sort of overcome the odds played into the lore that has surrounded him since.
Yeah, lore is a really good word. And again, we're both East Coast kids. You're Jersey, I'm Delaware. I think that, Philadelphia, New York sports, Maryland, DC, that encompasses a lot of our immediate family and interests. But I don't think any player of the 2000s was more larger than life. We had mentioned a little bit, Shaq and Kobe probably belong there. We didn't get a chance to mention Yao Ming, who I think was really physically obviously larger than life, but brought such awareness to the NBA and really was that ambassador to Asia. But I think that Allen Iverson to me is the most larger than life icon in really the 2000s, but for some people probably in their basketball fandom, not just because of his his physical nature compared to the NBA players being smaller. But he's beloved by so many because of the way he played the game. But that's the fun part, I think, that most people remember, right? Most people remember that he played his heart out and that he was an amazing scorer and a killer. But there was so much, turmoil on the back end. Most people remember the infamous, practice, talking about practice thing, right? But that runs so much deeper than just that one soundbite. In Philadelphia sports, that was an ongoing cultural divide of, what is your tolerance for Allen Iverson in terms of the fact that Philadelphia represents this blue collar? You go to work, you do your job, you don't complain, or maybe you complain, but you still do your job. But, that was an ongoing issue for when the Sixers were really rising to that title playoff contention. Iverson brought them to the first final since the one we talked about in the 80s. And that was really big in Philadelphia sports. That was, oh my God, we're back. Philadelphia's on top of the sports world again in the basketball. But I don't think that it's mentioned enough in the Allen Iverson story per se about, the mental side of probably having to overcome such media scrutiny, fan scrutiny, being constantly asked, about his whereabouts. And he would infamously say sometimes, well, I just like to stay up late, or I like to stay out, which is a really cool thing to say in a way. But, maybe if you're a season ticket holder or fan, that's maybe not what you want to hear from a franchise player. So there's just this amazing dichotomy surrounding this NBA icon who I think shifted into culturally because, he had the awesome hair, he had tattoos, he had his own shoe line, which every kid seemingly had Iverson shoes. So for me, when I think of 2000s, who deserves some more background information, I think it's Allen Iverson.
Yeah, and especially thinking about the way he played and his supporting cast during that time, he shouldered a lot of that load. If you think back to those early 2000 Sixers teams, and you detailed it a little bit on the podcast, some of the other players who were important to those teams, Dikembe Mutombo was towards the back end of his career, even though he was the defensive player of the year.
Yeah, he was good.
Aaron McKee, sixth man of the year. But beyond that, the only other player that I can think of, and again, I'm not a Sixers fan, but thinking back to those teams that made the NBA finals and made deep playoff runs is Eric Snow. And he was definitely a defensive oriented shooting guard, but that left so much of the scoring load on Iverson's shoulders that, thinking back on it again, you mentioned that practice quote is seen as sort of like a fun anecdote, whatever, but it spoke to a lot of how he was feeling at the time of, I'm the franchise player. I deserve to be able to decide if I'm going to practice or not, if I'm feeling like I'm injured or worn out or tired, because ultimately, that when I step on the floor, I'm going to give you 100% all the time and put my body on the line. You mentioned his style of play. He was the ultimate, attack the basket, mouse in the house kind of player.
Just fearless.
And just fearless is probably the best way to put it. He is a Hall of Famer for a reason. And I love now that the way that he's able to appreciate the modern players, the modern game, and in a way that a lot of players from those bygone eras, like to to spark debate and throw their 2 cents in and say, "Oh, we would have beaten them." And every time Iverson is asked about it, he says these players are so much better conditioned. They're so much better developed. They have so many different ways that they can attack you. And honestly, I don't know if we would, because it's the game has evolved. And I love that he's kind of stuck around as this old head, but not in a way that you would consider other old heads to be like cranky about the modern NBA. He embraces it fully, and I really appreciate that about him. And I think his his profile, his again lore is going to be defined by how fearless he was. But some of the other things that we mentioned definitely happened. We haven't even mentioned, even before his time with the Sixers, his arrest, which was detailed by a great ESPN documentary. You should check it out. And otherwise, I think we can look back and appreciate him. Hopefully Sixers fans and other NBA fans can do the same.
Yeah, I mean, he's, like we said, I think the lore, that's a word I just haven't heard someone say out loud in so long, and I just don't, it fits so perfectly here for a guy who played 47 some minutes per game during that playoff run in 2000s, who was injured, who had to play really good teams like the Toronto Raptors. He went through Vince Carter, who at the time was the NBA was trying to make, in a way, the NBA's face. He was really good with media. He was seemingly really breezy, easygoing guy. And you had a little more of that, and who didn't have a good relationship with the media, and who necessarily didn't have a good relationship with his coach, who was known as being a hard-nosed, like, do your job kind of thing and come to practice. But it seemingly all came to a head in that NBA finals, and I wish they had won. I really do. I remember really, really rooting for them. And but one way or another, I think we're still going to look back on Allen Iverson in a favorable light, which is deserved.
Agreed. Well, this has been fun. Hopefully you enjoyed our little episode here. Check out the main podcast, Game Tape Rewind. The episode will be released shortly, if it's not already out by the time you see this. And we will talk to you next time.